all professional with my hair. All right. A long list of studies shows that Americans in the 1950s thought the Bill of Rights was recently written by communists. That 40% did not know the name of their vice president, and few can name their own representative in Congress, says Jennifer L. Hochschild, a Harvard University professor of government. Yes, these studies were over 60 years ago, but I find political ignorance still relevant today, because when you ask somebody about the government, I usually don't get that great of an answer, and a lot of people don't know much about their candidates. But on June 3rd, California is holding their primary election, which is why I found this to be relevant. And if you are a registered voter, you do get booklets from them, and they send you one about the propositions, and they also send you some about the candidates that gives you a little sample poll with it as well. So whether or not you read these books, I think you have a decision on June 3rd to either vote informed. So today, I want to persuade you guys to become informed voters. In 2012, I was 18, but I was actually an informed voter because I had a really good government class, and our government teacher took us to websites that were credible sources, and he talked about propositions with us, and I just benefit from that greatly, and I was able to vote informed. So today, I want to discuss to you why is it important to be an informed voter and also vote. I want to debunk an argument that is common with voting, and I also want to give you some tools on how to become an informed voter. First off, I want to discuss voting just in general a little briefly, and how it has been important in the past, especially when you think about women's suffragettes and the African Americans. The women's suffragettes, History.com said that on August 26, 1920, the women's suffragettes had accomplished their goal and were able to vote, thanks to the 19th Amendment. And they had been fighting for this since the 1850s, so they've been fighting for it about 70 years, and they weren't fighting for it, well, were fighting for equality, but they're also fighting for the right to vote, and they saw it as a privilege and a way to make a statement, and just a way to reach out to the government. Also in 1867, for the African Americans, only southern states allowed them to vote in 1867 after the Civil War, which is kind of ironic because the northern states didn't allow them to vote, but in 1870 they were able to vote, and they're able to vote because of the 15th Amendment that was established, and that gave them the right to vote. And they also found that voting was a privilege, which is why they wanted it for so long. And so I think we should take that perspective and think about the fact that people in the past have fought for our right to vote, so we should be doing that today. Next, I would like to cover informed voting as a whole and discuss why it is important. I think it's important because we're not just influencing ourselves in this situation. We're influencing our community. We're influencing the government by voting for specific people, and it's important for our future to think about these things because we don't want to just go vote for a candidate and have no idea what they're talking about. Just like Obama said, change, we want to know what change is. We want to know what he's changing, what he wants to change in the last 4 years that he was president, but change. And we just see this and we're like, what is this? We're just voting for him randomly. But I think you guys should think about that because he is changing our future, and he is changing the way we put things through our economy and other things, and I think our children would be affected by that, so I think that's really important. Unfortunately, there's an argument that comes up when we're talking about voting, which is basically, what can my one vote do? Can my one vote actually make a difference? Well, with that, I think you're looking in the wrong perspective, because when you look at a person, they're an individual, but they're the individual of a community. It's a whole community, and we're not just talking about an individual, one person, not just talking about me or Jose or Professor Kirkham or anybody. We're focusing on this person in a community, and the community all works together to vote. And that's why we should, not only should the person become an informed voter, but everybody should become informed voters, because it's the community that is voting. So we want to focus on that. Next, I do want to cover what the tools in which ways you can become informed voters. First off, television is all right, but it mainly focuses on entertainment, so you want to be careful what you watch on TV. There's this Stanford has a quote that says, "Political stories are considered boring and garner little media attention. During major political campaigns, when it is harder to ignore politics completely, the media tends to focus on the superficial topics, such as a horse race, who's ahead and who's behind, and the candidates' personal lives." So what he's basically saying there is that they focus on the superficial stuff. So normally when it comes to television, especially when it comes to like just basic news stations, you want to be careful about what you're doing and what you're watching, because they tend to just focus on the superficial and fluffy stuff, and that's not really what we need to be informed. We need meaty, hard stuff, which you can actually find on TV though, because at least, for example, in my house, my parents watch Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly on Fox, and they focus on political issues. They're not trying to give you entertainment. They're trying to focus and pay attention to the specific things that are going on in politics and in the government. You can also find some sources through the booklets that I mentioned earlier, the one that talks about propositions and the other one that talks about candidates. And they can give us information we need. They're pretty unbiased, so you don't have to worry about bias too much in there. And then lastly, there's also the candidates' websites. That's a good place to go to, because they'll have little things like they're briefly talking about, okay, I'm talking about this, but they like branch out and talk about the whole plan that they're talking about, and that helps you give an idea of what to do and how to vote for them, because you don't want someone going in not knowing a whole lot about how they're going to influence our jobs or how they're going to influence education. We want to see how exactly they're doing that, because we don't want them to just raise a bunch of taxes or anything and just cost us a bunch of money. I mean, we should do some money, but hey. So, yes, I think it is important that we should all become informed voters. We did have, in the past, women suffragettes and African Americans fighting for this right, and we should realize that it is a right and it is a privilege. And we should also consider, as my friend who goes to Biola, she's a philosophy major, and she just said that we the people, we're not talking about just the individual, we're talking about we the people. And I think she put it in a really good perspective there. We also just want to focus on finding the right tools and finding the right information so that we can become fully informed. Thank you.
Just a good speech. No, I'm just kidding.
Frank, you here? Nope. Just checking. Trying to make sure. All right, Amy, I thought you had a pretty good introduction. I like the reference to the people who struggled to be able to vote before as a justification for taking this action. I think you could show what some of the consequences are of people being less informed voters and what some of the problems are that result from that. I think that there are probably plenty of illustrations, and people on both sides of the aisle would complain that somebody didn't understand what's going on here. Well, give us an example of maybe one from each perspective where somebody, if they were better informed, they'd been better able to participate in that community that you talked about. It's pretty well organized. I thought it was easy to follow. The transitions between the points, the first transition is clear, it's smooth, but as you move into the second and the third points, it just feels sort of like you're checking off, and I think there needs to be a little bit more graceful language as you're doing that. I think you could use a little bit more research on a couple of the points. Like I mentioned before, some of the problems with being a low information voter or somebody who's unfamiliar with the issues. When people vote, regardless of how many people we have to vote, you mentioned the propositions in California. Most states, not all states have propositions like that. So the question, that's an easy place to look. How well did people understand the propositions that they were looking at? How frequently were the websites visited? How much money got spent in advertising versus how much money was, or excuse me, how much time was spent on analyzing those issues? You talk about the news media covering issues, for instance, and you mentioned a couple of examples of places where they might do that. You could easily look, for instance, at a proposition that spent $100 million trying to get it passed in advertising, and how much coverage did that proposition get on the news? There's probably some research on an issue like that. How often did Proposition 8 or 25 or 72 or whatever the number happened to be get talked about on the news? I think you could show that maybe there is a problem with trying to rely on just television as a source of news. But you had a good list of tools that I think that people could go to. I appreciated that. Delivery was all very solid. You did a good job speaking to the audience for the most part. Your audience contact was fine. I thought it was very fluent while you were speaking too. Thank you.